You know, if you read Parting Visions, that's the one thing I've learned from listening to the near-death experiences of children, is I have the absolute conviction now that the patterns of life are often revealed in so-called coincidence. And the reason that I've reached that, admittedly speculative leap, is from the simple fact that I've seen the healing that paying attention to so-called coincidence can bring in people's lives. And that is a healing that I have not seen in any other arena.
All those privileged to have stood in the presence of the being of light speak of being bathed in the most complete, most profound, most compassionate, and unconditional love they have ever known. The overwhelming message brought back by those who have had this experience is love one another.
And that's the way I feel. I feel totally different. I keep thinking, have I done enough? Was I kind enough to that person?
Who is God? God is love. It meant nothing. It was two separate things to me because of the way it was presented. But now I know it's the same thing.
The love that's there on the other side has no limits. It has ultimate depth. It has complete forgiveness. It has complete understanding.
And that love, you just can't even describe it. I call it unconditional love.
And that bright, shining love, that love that loves without qualifications, the way you'd accept your newborn baby, the way you'd accept your husband on the altar, complete, no strings attached love is close to the idea of what's on the other side.
Almost uniformly, these people talk about a deep sense of compassion, of caring, of empathy, of love, of oneness and unity that is experienced in the near-death phenomenon. And so I think these people are tapping into something that we demonstrate in the laboratory in the prayer experiments, the unifying power of love.
In my experience, that pure love, that superhuman love that has no boundaries and is all-powerful is what is connecting all of this.
I think we are arriving at a concept that love is some sort of glue that connects creatures, that connects living things at a distance. It is a power, it is a force, if you will, that can bring about distant happenings for the better. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that we have empirical evidence for the life-changing, world-changing power of love.
A good example of how a personal encounter with this divine love can bring about a positive life transformation is the case of Diane Morrissey. Diane is a classically trained musician. Prior to her near-death experience, she played clarinet with a symphony orchestra. Classical music was her life. By her own admission, she was something of a snob about it, looking down her nose at anyone who listened to any other kind of music, other than classical, of course. As a result of her brush with death, she's had a complete attitude reversal. She changed her career, gave up playing classical music. She's now a more caring and compassionate person. In fact, she devotes much of her time to helping others.
So maybe somebody else.
In her role as support group leader for IONS, she helps people put their near-death experience into perspective as they embark on the rest of their lives.
Here's how Diane had her conversation with God.
I was getting ready to have a great big party in my home. I invited a lot of people, and I wanted everything to look really nice, so I cleaned my fish tank. And in the process of assembling it, evidently I did it incorrectly. When I passed the den door, I noticed there was a big puddle underneath the fish tank.
What Diane didn't realize was that the water carried a deadly charge of electricity.
When I went to pick it up, the tubing flipped water across my cheek. And I looked down and I thought, the very last thought in my head, wow, I shouldn't have touched that. I was at the ceiling and I noticed my dog was trying to wake my physical body up on the floor. And I thought, good boy, he's trying to wake me up. I looked toward the kitchen and could see the telephone and instantly knew I should call for help. So I went straight through the walls like they weren't even there. And when I went to pick the telephone up with my right hand, my hand went through it. I walked around the house for a time, and I stopped one moment in the living room and looked down and was real surprised to see my legs through the top of the glass coffee table. I tried to save me at the beginning, but as I stayed in the experience, it mattered less and less whether I saved me. And Diane Morrissey just wasn't as important as I was at the beginning of the experience. I didn't know how to get back in my body, but I wasn't frightened that I couldn't. And the last thing I said, and I just couldn't believe it, I said, "How sad she's done so very little." And I thought I had a really full life that counted for lots of good things that I did for people. But I knew in my heart I never really touched anybody. At about that time, I went right through the tunnel, right at the dim windows.
Many of those individuals who have had a complete near-death experience report the one aspect of it that had the most profound life transformational effect was the life review. They've had an opportunity to review their life accomplishments and their mistakes and see how their actions affected others. The Scottish poet Robert Burns, in one of his poems, reflected on how great a gift from God it would be to see ourselves as others see us. During a life review, we will.
It's important for all of us to listen to this part and take it very deeply. Not only will you be and see everything you've ever done, you will become the people that you have encountered, and thereby feeling how they feel about you.
I could not pass into that light that I was so attracted to. And at that barrier is probably the most meaningful part of this whole experience, because at that stopping point, I saw everything in my life that I ever did or saw or felt or thought that I hid from others or myself, and yet it was all understood. Everything in my life that you could put a good label on or a bad label on was there for not only me to see, but all others. In that light, I saw my whole life unfold, and I was having insight into what my life was about.
I was able to deal with it because I wasn't just Daniel Brinkley. I had begun to peel away the ego self and begun to be what we truly are, powerful spiritual beings.
And I was held accountable for my life. I felt how others felt when I acted a certain way. I experienced their feelings.
What I think the experience did for me was it made me more aware of others.
In absolute love, I was being given an understanding that I never had before.
I was always real fortunate. I came from a wonderful home, had a wonderful childhood. My parents loved me desperately. And their love, you just, compared to this woman, you can't even compare it. When she came, she stood next to me, and she extended her hand outward, and she said, "Look there." And when I turned my head, I saw from the moment I was born, and I watched every second of my life from the moment I was born until I died. And it wasn't just seeing it, I lived it again, exactly the way I felt it the first time, but with a new sense of kind of intellectual understanding about how I could have done it different, what might have been better, and other things that I cared little about, that I didn't think made an impression on anybody's life at all, were very significant. And probably the most important was when I worked at a convalescent hospital in high school, after school. And I used to give a lady graham crackers and milk before I'd leave the shift. And I had no idea how much I had changed her life, how grateful, how appreciative she was. And I thought it was so insignificant back at that time in the 11th grade, but it wasn't. It was like every spirit looking down and saying, "Thank you for doing this. This woman had nobody. No one loved her."
As a nurse, I was always very proud of how technically proficient I was. If you were having a heart attack and you came into my emergency department, you would have your vitals done immediately.
Nurse, I'm so scared.
I was missing the value of my role. Coming back with that lesson didn't necessarily slow me down, but when I put in my next IV, I held that person's hand. And I would find a way that someone could stay with them while I gave report, or that I would just take more care in what I did.
I not only felt every emotion I'd ever felt, I saw everything I had ever done. But more than that, and probably more important than anything else, I became every person I'd ever encountered in my life.
I don't understand why you're so upset
Financial
about this
matters
little...
take two people. Do you think this is a money tree? It's a lemon tree.
I kept waiting to be judged.
It's just
And
like
then I
last
realized it was me
Here's the
judging
check.
me.
Take it or leave
You know,
it, okay?
people say, oh, well, that's not so bad.
200. I want.
Well, only way I can relate it is, have you ever had a bad hair day times 10 million? That's how you're going to look at yourself. That's how you're going to focus on yourself, and that no one can judge you more harshly than you can. No one.